In the 41st millennium, there is only war. But in the spaces between real space and the immaterium, in the bleeding wounds where dimensions collide, there are doors, and sometimes something falls through them that was never meant to arrive. Doctor Strange, sorcerer. Supreme of Earth, master of the mystic arts, had faced demons, elder gods, and reality-warping entities that defied mortal comprehension. He had bargained with Dormammu in a time loop, sealed dimensional breaches with nothing but willpower and ancient incantations, and walked the astral plane as easily as ordinary men walked city streets. But nothing, absolutely nothing, had prepared him for the moment his carefully constructed portal magic intersected with something that should not exist. The entity he'd been fighting, a thing of tentacles and screaming geometries from beyond the dark dimension, had torn through 3 realities in pursuit of a cosmic artifact. Strange had cornered it, prepared to banish it back to the howling void from which it came. His hands moved in the precise gestures Wong had drilled into him decades ago, golden mandalas of light spinning into existence, the words of power flowing from his lips with surgical precision. Then the universe screamed. Not metaphorically, not in some poetic sense. Reality itself shrieked in agony as something impossibly vast tore through the fabric of space-time. Strange's portal magic, already strained from the battle, collided with a breach that reeked of madness and hunger. Colors that had no names flooded his vision. Sounds that predated language filled his ears. The entity he'd been fighting dissolved into atoms, and Strange felt himself yanked through a kaleidoscope of impossible angles. The Vishanti, his patrons, the source of his power, suddenly felt impossibly distant. Their voices, which had guided him through countless crises, became whispers drowned in a psychic ocean of screaming souls. Something was wrong with magic itself here. The fundamental laws he'd spent years mastering were suggestions at best, corrupted by some underlying force that felt simultaneously divine and utterly profane. Strange crashed into reality with the force of a falling star. The impact crater smoked in the ash wastes of Tertius Majoris, an imperial world clinging to survival on the edge of the segmentum obscurus. 3 moons hung in a bruised purple sky. The air tasted of promethium and decay. Strange pushed himself to his feet, the cloak of levitation unfurling from his shoulders protectively, and immediately doubled over as nausea hit him like a physical blow. His connection to the Vishanti flickered like a dying candle. Every spell formula in his mind felt wrong, corrupted by interference from some massive psychic presence that pressed against his consciousness like an ocean trying to drown an ant. Strange reached for the eye of Agamotto at his chest, but his fingers found only empty air. The time stone. Gone. Lost in the dimensional collapse. "No," he whispered. Then louder, "No, no, no." A last bolt shrieked past his head, superheating the air where he'd stood a second before. Strange spun, hands already moving through defensive gestures. Golden shields materialized, but they flickered, shot through with veins of purple and pink that writhed like living things. 20 figures in gray-green armor emerged from behind ruins of Rockcrete, lasguns trained on him. They wore gas masks and moved with military precision, but Strange's trained eye caught the icons welded to their armor. A skull within a gear, eagles with 2 heads, and Gothic script he couldn't read. "Unidentified contact!" barked a voice through a voxcaster, distorted by static. "Remain stationary! You will submit to Imperial authority for processing and sanctioning." Strange held his hands up slowly, the shields still shimmering around him. "I'm not your enemy. I don't know where I am or how I got here, but I mean you no harm." The lead soldier, an officer by the red plume on his helmet, made a sharp gesture. The soldiers didn't lower their weapons. "Unknown Psyker manifestation, requesting immediate inquisitorial response. Sector 12, coordinates—" "Psyker," Strange interrupted. "Listen, I think there's been a misunderstanding." One of the soldiers fired, not at Strange, but at the ground near his feet. "Silence, witch! Another word and we purge you where you stand!" Strange's mind raced. These weren't soldiers from any nation he recognized. Their weapons were crude but effective, some kind of laser technology. Their armor looked like it belonged in a Gothic cathedral mixed with a factory, and the way they said witch carried the weight of absolute terror and hatred. He reached out with his astral sense, trying to get a read on his surroundings, and immediately wished he hadn't. There was something massive in the psychic landscape of this world. No, not just this world. The entire universe thrummed with it. It felt like standing at the base of a mountain and realizing the mountain was watching you. And below it, beneath the surface of reality, something else churned. Something that made the dark dimension look like a pleasant dream. It was a roiling sea of emotions and madness, pressing against the barrier of physical reality like a predator testing a cage. Strange gasped and pulled his consciousness back. Blood dripped from his nose. The officer saw it and made another sharp gesture. "Warp touched. Immediate threat classification Hereticus. Fire at—" "Wait!" Strange's voice carried a harmonic resonance, a minor spell of persuasion. Several soldiers hesitated. "I don't know what a psyker is, I don't know what the warp is, and I sure as hell don't know who you are. But I'm a doctor, I'm a defender, and I just saved my entire reality from an extra-dimensional incursion. If you just—" The sky split open. A ship descended through the clouds, if ship was the right word for something that looked like a flying cathedral fortress. It was kilometers long, bristling with weapons, covered in Gothic architecture and what looked like statues. Golden eagles the size of buildings adorned its prow. Gun batteries that could level cities swiveled toward the crater where Strange stood. A voice boomed from every voxcaster in the area, resonating with absolute authority. "This is Inquisitor Vokos of the Ordo Hereticus. The unidentified sorcerer will cease all weird craft immediately and submit to Imperial custody. Resistance will be met with immediate execution. You have 10 seconds to comply." Strange looked at the ship, at the soldiers, at the 3 moons in the alien sky. And he realized with growing horror that he had no idea where, or perhaps when, he was. But one thing was absolutely certain. He'd just landed in a universe where magic was heresy, and he was about to be judged by people who shot first and never bothered with questions. The cloak of levitation billowed behind him as he raised his hands higher, keeping his shields active but non-threatening. His surgical training had taught him to stay calm under pressure. His years as Sorcerer Supreme had taught him to assess threats and adapt. This situation required both. "I surrender," Strange called out clearly. "But I want to speak with whoever's in charge, and I want to know exactly what kind of universe I just fell into." The Inquisitor's ship descended like the judgment of an angry god. If you crave stories of cosmic collisions and impossible heroes caught between realities, smash that subscribe button, because what happens when Earth's Sorcerer Supreme meets the Imperium of Man is just beginning. And trust me, you won't want to miss what comes next. The holding cell was a cube of blessed iron, 3 meters on each side, inscribed with prayers in a language Strange didn't recognize. Each wall bore a different set of warding symbols. Some he could almost parse with his mystical training, others that made his eyes water when he looked at them too long. A single servo skull floated in the corner, its mechanical eye lens whirring as it tracked his every movement, a dull red light pulsing in rhythm with some distant machine spirit. Strange sat cross-legged on the floor, the cloak pooled around him like a shield, and tried very hard not to panic. He'd been stripped of the few artifacts he'd carried, minor talismans, focus crystals, a few protective charms that the Imperium's agents had handled with long tongs and sealed in lead-lined boxes as if they were radioactive. The only thing they'd left him was the cloak itself, and only because it had physically fought the 3 armored soldiers who'd tried to remove it, wrapping around their arms and nearly strangling one before Strange called it off. "Sentient weird cloth," one of the Inquisitor's acolytes had muttered, marking something on a data slate with a stylus. Classification: demonic or xenotech. Recommend immediate incineration. It's not demonic, Strange had insisted. It's a relic, a tool. It responds to my will, but it's not alive in the way you're thinking. The acolyte had struck him across the face with a shock maul, and Strange had tasted blood and ozone. Silence, witch. Your words are tainted. That had been 6 hours ago, or maybe 12. Time was strange here, literally. Strange could feel it flowing wrong, like a river with eddies and whirlpools. His internal chronometer, usually precise to the second thanks to his photographic memory, kept skipping and stuttering. He closed his eyes and tried again to reach the Vishanti. The attempt was like shouting into a hurricane. He could feel something responding, distant, warped by interference. But the words of power that should have flowed easily caught in his throat, twisted by the ambient corruption he was beginning to understand, saturated this entire reality. The warp. That's what the soldiers had called it. And psyker seemed to be their term for magic users. Strange had met psychics before, powerful ones. Charles Xavier, Jean Grey, even Wanda Maximoff, whose chaos magic defied conventional mystical laws. But this was different. The psychic pressure here wasn't just individual minds. It was a fundamental force of nature, a dimension unto itself that pressed against reality like a tumor. And it was hungry. The door materialized without warning. One moment, solid iron wall, the next an opening outlined in amber light. Strange was on his feet instantly, the cloak spreading defensively. 3 figures entered. The first was a woman in crimson power armor, her face a patchwork of scars and augmetic implants, one eye replaced by a targeting lens that clicked and whirred as it focused on Strange. The second was a robed figure whose face was hidden behind a skull-faced mask, their hands ending in mechadendrites that twitched like metal snakes. The third made Strange's breath catch. He was massive, easily 2.5 meters tall, broader than any human had a right to be, wearing midnight blue armor covered in mystical symbols and purity seals. His face was weathered stone given human form, eyes like chips of ice, and on his forehead was a third eye tattoo that pulsed with psychic energy that Strange could feel like heat from a furnace. "I am Inquisitor Lord Vokos," the woman said, her voice modulated by vox grills in her throat. "This is Magos Zenith of the Adeptus Mechanicus, and this," she gestured to the giant, "is Codicier Thelonius of the Blood Ravens, 3rd Company Librarius." The giant's psychic presence was controlled, disciplined, but underneath Strange sensed power that could crack mountains. A space marine. The term appeared in Strange's mind unbidden, pulled from the giant's surface thoughts before Thelonius's mental shields slammed down like a vault door. "You read my mind," the librarian said. Not a question. His voice was a rumble of distant thunder. "Interesting. Most unsanctioned psychers lack such precision." "I'm not a psycher," Strange said carefully. "I'm a sorcerer. There's a difference." "Semantics," Vokos snapped. She pulled a data slate from her belt and began reading. "Unregistered weird manifestation. Arrival via possible warp breach. Demonstrable reality manipulation abilities. Possession of potentially xenotech or chaos-corrupted artifacts. Unauthorized use of sorceress powers in Imperial space. Any one of these offenses carries a sentence of death." She looked up, her human eye cold. "You have committed all 5. Strange kept his voice level. "I'm not from your Imperium. I'm not even from this universe. I was fighting an extra-dimensional entity when something, a massive psychic rupture, pulled me here. I'm not your enemy." "The enemy always claims innocence," Vokos said. She nodded to Magos Zenith, who stepped forward with a device that looked like a metal spider attached to a brass globe covered in dials. "Thought scanner, pattern Omicron 7, the Magos intoned in a voice like grinding gears. Will determine veracity of claims and catalog known heresies. Subject will experience moderate to severe psychic trauma. Survival rate, 63.4%. Wait, Strange started. Thelonious raised one massive hand. Hold, Magos. The Space Marine studied Strange with those ice-chip eyes. You claim to be from another reality entirely. Not another world in the Imperium. Not a lost human colony. Another universe. Yes, Strange said. I'm from Earth, but not your Earth, if you even have one. I'm a master of the mystic arts, trained in Camartage, empowered by entities called the Vishanti. I protect my reality from dimensional threats, and I was in the middle of doing exactly that when something catastrophically wrong happened with a warp breach. Camartage, Thelonious repeated slowly. The Vishanti. His third eye tattoo pulsed. Unknown to the Librarius archives. Unknown to the inquisitorial databases. He turned to Vokos. Either he is an extraordinarily skilled liar, or he speaks truth. Or he's been corrupted by Tzeentch, Vokos countered. The Architect of Fate specializes in layers of deception. This could be a demonic incursion wearing human skin. Strange felt ice in his veins. The way she said, Tzeentch, the psychic weight behind the name, made his mystical senses scream warnings. That was a god, or something close enough that the distinction didn't matter. I've fought demons before, Strange said. I know possession, I know corruption. I'm not infected by anything except acute confusion and a desperate need to understand where I am and how to get home. Prove it, Vokos said flatly. Strange met her gaze. How? Thelonious stepped forward, and despite Strange's considerable height, he had to look up at the Space Marine. I will enter your mind, sorcerer. I will walk your memories. If you are pure, you will survive intact. If you are corrupted... The librarian's hand moved to the force sword at his belt. You will be cleansed. Every instinct Strange had screamed at him to refuse. Letting another psychic into your mind was dangerous even under controlled circumstances. Here, where the rules of magic were warped and his own powers were compromised, it could be suicide. But the alternative was the thought scanner with its 63% survival rate. Do it, Strange said. But know this. My mind contains knowledge of mystical forces, dimensional entities, and cosmic powers that might be incompatible with whatever psychic discipline you practice. If something goes wrong, it won't be because I'm corrupted. It'll be because our magics don't mix. Thelonious nodded slowly. A fair warning. I have touched the minds of alien psychers before. I am experienced with incompatibility. He placed one massive hand on Strange's forehead, and Strange felt psychic power build like static before a lightning strike. Brace yourself, sorcerer. This will not be pleasant. The librarian's mind crashed into Strange's like a tidal wave, and the universe dissolved into shared memory and psychic fire. The mind link was nothing like the gentle melding Strange had experienced with other psychics in his universe. This was invasion, overwhelming force applied with surgical precision. Thelonious's consciousness was a fortress of iron will, shaped by decades of hypno-conditioning and psychic combat training. It tore through Strange's surface thoughts like a battering ram through parchment. Strange gasped, stumbling backward even though his body hadn't moved. The cloak wrapped around him protectively, but this was an assault on a level where physical comfort meant nothing. Show me your origin, Thelonious commanded, his mental voice resonating with harmonics that suggested this was not a request. Strange had no choice. The memories spilled out. His life as a surgeon, the car accident that shattered his hands, the desperate journey to Camartage, the Ancient One's teachings. Thelonious watched it all with the detached focus of a man reading a tactical report, cataloging every detail. But when the memories reached Strange's first encounter with the dark dimension, everything changed. Thelonious recoiled, his psychic presence flickering with something that might have been recognition or horror. Strange felt the Space Marine's shields strengthen, pushing back against the memory of Dormammu, that vast, malevolent presence from beyond time. "What manner of demon is this?" Thelonious demanded. "Not a demon," Strange pushed back, finding his mental footing. "An entity from a dimension where time doesn't exist. I bargained with it, trapped it in a time loop until it agreed to leave Earth alone. Bargained." The word carried waves of disapproval and grudging respect. "You treated with a warp entity and survived uncorrupted?" "It wasn't the warp. It was—" Strange struggled to find a frame of reference that would translate. A different layer of reality. A dimension parallel to physical space, but operating under different fundamental laws. Thelonious's mind pressed deeper, and Strange felt the librarian's consciousness brushing against the space where his connection to the Vishanti resided. The contact was like touching a live wire. Both of them jerked back simultaneously. "What are these? Vishanti?" "My patrons," Strange explained, trying to keep his thoughts organized under the psychic assault. "Entities of immense power who maintain the balance between dimensions. Agamotto, Ashtur, Hoggoth. They grant me access to mystical forces in exchange for my service as protector of the sanctum." "Gods," Thelonious translated. "You serve gods of the warp." "No, they're not gods, and they don't exist in your warp. They exist in—" Strange paused, realization dawning. "They can't reach me here, can they? That's why my magic feels wrong. The dimensional barriers are different. Your warp is... it's like a scar across everything. An infected wound in reality itself." Thelonious didn't respond, but Strange felt agreement ripple through the mind link. The librarian pushed forward again, this time searching for evidence of chaos taint, corruption markers that Strange's psychic signature should display if he were touched by the ruinous powers. Instead, Thelonious found the memory of Strange's astral projection attempt, the brief, horrifying moment when Strange had touched the warp. The librarian stopped. His psychic presence went absolutely still. "You touched the Imperium directly, unshielded, untrained. You should be a gibbering madman or a host for demonic possession." "I've walked the astral plane thousands of times," Strange countered. "I know how to protect my consciousness. But this Imperium of yours is like nothing I've ever encountered. It's not just a dimension. It's alive, actively malevolent. And there's something else, something massive, beneath and above it simultaneously. Something that feels almost... human?" The mind link shattered. Thelonious staggered backward, his massive frame actually swaying. His hand went to his force sword instinctively, and for a moment Strange thought the Space Marine would draw it. Instead, the librarian steadied himself and turned to Inquisitor Vokos. "He speaks truth," Thelonious said, his voice hoarse. "He is not corrupted by the ruinous powers. His soul signature is clean, impossibly clean. There is no taint of chaos in him." Vokos's augmetic eye whirred, focusing on Strange with new intensity. "Explain." "His mind is a fortress built on principles we do not comprehend," Thelonious continued. "His training, his discipline, it rivals that of the Librarius, but it follows different principles entirely. He has touched entities that may be analogous to the chaos gods in his own reality, yet he remains uncorrupted because—" The Space Marine trailed off, struggling for words. "Because in his universe, such entities can be negotiated with, bound, controlled." "Heresy," Magos Zenith intoned. "No," Thelonious said sharply. "Alien. There is a difference." He looked back at Strange. "You claim your Vishanti are not gods, yet you draw power from them. How is this different from the sorcery of the warp?" Strange took a breath, organizing his thoughts. This was the moment. Either he made them understand, or he was executed as a witch. In my universe, magic is a tool. A science, almost. It follows rules, laws that can be studied and mastered. The entities I call upon, the Vishanti, the Book of Vishanti's teachings, even the dark powers I've learned to counter, they exist in higher dimensions, yes, but they're not sentient chaos. They have purposes, goals, limitations. The Vishanti want to preserve reality because its destruction would harm them too. It's symbiosis, not worship. But here, Strange continued, gesturing vaguely at the walls, at the universe beyond, your warp is different. It's not a tool, it's a predator. Every time someone uses psychic power, they're opening a door to something that wants to devour them. That's why your psychic training is so brutal, isn't it? Because the alternative is instant possession, or worse. Vokos and Thelonious exchanged glances. The Magos' mechadendrites twitched with what might have been agitation. The sorcerer demonstrates unsettling comprehension of forbidden lore, Magos Zenith said. Recommend continued observation. Potential value as source of xenomagical analysis. Or potential catastrophic liability, Vokos countered. She stepped closer to Strange, her scarred face unreadable. Let us speak plainly, sorcerer. You arrive in Imperial space wielding powers you claim are clean magic. You touch the warp without corruption. You possess knowledge of dimensional manipulation that would take our most advanced Ordo Malleus Inquisitors decades to comprehend. From where I stand, you are either the most dangerous, unsanctioned psyker in the sector, or... She paused, and Strange saw calculation in her human eye. Or, he prompted. Or you are an asset, she finished. One that could be leveraged against the Emperor's enemies if properly controlled. I don't do controlled, Strange said flatly. I work with people, not for them. If you want my help against whatever threats you face, we negotiate as equals. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Thelonious' hand moved fractionally toward his sword. Vokos' augmetic eye flared red. You dare, she began. I dare because I have to, Strange interrupted. You've told me this is the 41st millennium. You've shown me a universe at war with itself, where humanity clings to survival through faith and firepower. I'm not blind, Inquisitor. I can see the desperation in your eyes. Whatever this warp is, whatever these chaos gods are, they're winning. Slowly, inevitably, they're winning. Choose your next words carefully, sorcerer, Vokos said, her voice deadly quiet. Strange met her gaze. I'm offering to help, but I need to understand what I'm dealing with. I need access to information. Your history, your enemies, the nature of the warp itself. I need to know why my magic works differently here and how to adapt it. And most importantly, I need to know if there's a way home. Silence stretched between them. Finally, Thelonious spoke. There is a way to test his intentions definitively. The Librarius maintains a psychic proving ground on the Litany of Fury, a simulation chamber where psychers can practice demon-binding techniques in controlled conditions. If his discipline is as formidable as his mind suggests, he will survive contact with a minor warp entity. If not, I die, and you dispose of the body, Strange finished. And if I succeed? If you succeed, Vokos said slowly, we speak further, under less terminal conditions. She turned to leave, then paused. One more question, sorcerer. That presence you sensed in the warp, the massive, almost human thing, did it acknowledge you? Strange remembered that moment of contact. Vast, terrible, burning with purpose and pain simultaneously. No. But I think it knew I was there. Why? Vokos' expression was unreadable. Because if the Emperor took notice of your arrival, that changes everything. She left without elaboration, Magos Zenith trailing behind her like a mechanical shadow. Thelonious remained, studying Strange with those ice-chip eyes. "The Emperor protects," the Space Marine said quietly. "But he also tests. Survive the proving ground, sorcerer, and perhaps you will learn what it means to wield power in a universe where hope itself is a weapon against the darkness." The cell door sealed shut again, leaving Strange alone with his thoughts and the growing certainty that he'd just agreed to face something far more dangerous than any demon he'd encountered in his own reality. The cloak settled around his shoulders like a comforting weight, and Strange closed his eyes, preparing himself for whatever trial awaited. The proving ground was not a room, it was a scar. Strange stood at the threshold of a chamber deep within the Litany of Fury's Fortress Monastery section, and every mystical sense he possessed screamed warnings. The space beyond the reinforced blast doors was 20 meters across, spherical, its walls covered in hexagrammic wards that pulsed with sickly yellow light. At the center floated a crystalline cage, not metaphorical but literal, a geometrically impossible prison woven from what looked like frozen lightning and prayers etched in silver. Inside the cage, something waited. "That," Strange said carefully, "is not a simulation." "No," Thelonious agreed. He stood beside Strange in full battle plate, his force sword drawn and crackling with psychic energy. Two other Space Marine librarians flanked them, Epistolary Varen, whose armor bore scorch marks from psychic fire, and Lexicanum Mordai, younger but radiating barely controlled power. "Simulations are insufficient for true testing. This is a screamer of Tzeentch, a lesser demon but potent enough to flense an unprepared psyker's soul from his body in seconds." Strange studied the thing in the cage. It defied easy description. Wings that existed in too many dimensions, a form that hurt to look at directly, colors that had no names in any human language. It radiated hunger and cruel intelligence in equal measure. "You want me to what, exactly? Banish it? Bind it?" "Survive it," Varen said bluntly. The epistolary's voice was rough, like gravel grinding. "We will release the demon for precisely 30 seconds. If you can defend yourself without being possessed, corrupted, or killed, you pass." "And if I can do more than defend?" Strange asked. The three librarians exchanged glances. Mordai, the youngest, spoke with barely concealed eagerness. "Then you would demonstrate capabilities beyond any sanctioned psyker in the Imperium, and the Inquisitor's assessment would carry significant weight." Strange understood the subtext. These warriors wanted to see if he was the real thing, if the power he claimed was genuine or elaborate deception. And more than that, they wanted to see if his clean magic could accomplish what their brutal psychic discipline struggled with, dominating a demon without risking corruption. "I need a minute to prepare," Strange said. "You have 30 seconds. Vokos's voice crackled through Vox speakers mounted in the walls. Strange looked up to see observation windows where the Inquisitor and her retinue watched from a shielded gallery. "And sorcerer? The hexagrammic wards will contain the demon. They will not protect you. That is your responsibility." Strange breathed out slowly, centering himself. The cloak billowed around him, sensing the danger and coiling protectively. Without the Time Stone, without reliable access to the Vishanti, he was operating on fundamentals, the core techniques that the Ancient One had drilled into him before he'd ever touched a relic or called upon higher powers. Mystic arts were about will, focus, and understanding. The gestures and incantations were focusing tools, not the source of power itself. Power came from the sorcerer's conviction, their ability to impose order on chaos through sheer force of disciplined consciousness. And if there was one thing Stephen Strange possessed, it was discipline. "I'm ready," he said. Thelonious raised his force sword. Psychic energy arced from the blade to a control lectern carved with eagle motifs. "Release the demon. Mark." The crystalline cage shattered. The screamer exploded outward with a sound like reality tearing, its form unfolding in directions Strange's eyes couldn't follow. It was fast, impossibly fast. A blur of wings and talons and screaming mouths that existed in overlapping layers of space. Strange's hands moved. The Tau mandalas formed instantly, golden circles of geometric perfection spinning into existence around his forearms. But here, in this warp-saturated universe, they were different. Veins of purple and pink threaded through the gold. Corruption trying to seep in through the cracks in reality where magic touched the Imperium. The screamer struck his shields with the force of a missile. Strange staggered, gritting his teeth as psychic feedback screamed through his nervous system. The demon wasn't just physical, it was attacking on multiple levels simultaneously. Its talons raked at his mystical defenses, while its shriek battered his mind, trying to find purchase in his consciousness. "Submit," a voice whispered directly into his thoughts. "The architect knows you. The changer of ways sees your potential. You could be magnificent, sorcerer. So many paths, so many futures. Let me show you." "I've heard better sales pitches from Mephisto," Strange snarled. He shifted his stance, and the Tau mandalas reconfigured into chains of golden light. But when he tried to bind the demon the way he'd bound countless entities before, the spell twisted. The warp interference was too strong, the demon's nature too fundamentally different from the creatures he'd fought in his own universe. The screamer laughed, a sound like breaking glass and dying stars, and phased through his bindings as if they were smoke. 10 seconds gone. Strange changed tactics. If he couldn't bind it, he needed to understand it. He opened his mystical senses fully, reaching out to analyze the demon's nature, and nearly screamed as knowledge flooded his mind. The screamer wasn't alive in any conventional sense. It was a fragment of consciousness given form, a splinter of the warp god Tzeentch made manifest. It had no true physical body. What he was seeing was merely the interface between its essence and real space. It was thought and emotion made flesh, sustained by the psychic energy of the Imperium, and it was trying to anchor itself to him, using the contact with his shields as a pathway to possession. 15 seconds. Strange did something he'd never attempted before. Instead of fighting the demon's nature, he embraced understanding it. He stopped trying to impose his universe's rules on this entity and instead worked with the fundamental laws of this reality. Laws he was beginning to grasp with terrible clarity. The warp was emotion. Raw, unfiltered, primordial emotion given form and power. The demon was change, ambition, hope twisted into malevolent cunning. It fed on uncertainty, on the desire for knowledge and power. So Strange gave it certainty. He dropped his shields entirely. "Strange, no!" Thelonious roared. But the Sorcerer Supreme was already moving. The screamer lunged, its form unfolding to engulf him completely. For one terrible moment, Strange felt the demon's essence trying to flow into him, probing for weakness, searching for the hooks of desire or ambition it could exploit for possession. Instead, it found a mind that had bargained with Dormammu. A consciousness that had died thousands of times in a time loop and never broken. A will forged in the furnace of absolute certainty about who and what Stephen Strange was. The demon recoiled, shrieking. Strange's hands moved in a complex gesture, but this time he wasn't drawing on the Vishanti or any external power source. He was drawing on his own absolute conviction, his surgical precision, his photographic memory that held every mystical theorem he'd ever studied. He spoke words of power in a language that predated the Imperium, the foundational language of magic itself, syllables that described the architecture of reality at its most basic level. The screamer tried to flee, but Strange's spell had already taken hold. Not binding in the traditional sense. Something else. He'd created a mirror. The demon's own nature reflected back at it perfectly, a psychic feedback loop that trapped it in a cage of its own essence. Every attempt to phase through, to change form, to adapt, the mirror showed it what it was trying to do before it completed the action, creating a temporal causality lock that froze it in place. 25 seconds. Strange held the working, sweat pouring down his face, blood dripping from his nose. The cloak wrapped around him, adding its own mystical weight to the spell. The demon thrashed and screamed, but it couldn't escape the prison of its own reflection. At 30 seconds exactly, Thelonious slammed his force sword into the control lectern. The crystalline cage reformed around the screamer, severing Strange's connection to the demon and sealing it away once more. The mirror spell dissolved, and Strange collapsed to one knee, gasping. The proving ground fell silent except for the demon's muffled shrieks from within its prison. Varen spoke first, his voice carrying a note of something that might have been awe. He didn't banish it. He didn't bind it. He trapped it with its own nature. Impossible, Mordai whispered. That technique, it's not in any librarious teaching. It's not in any grimoire or tome. How did you— I improvised, Strange said hoarsely, pushing himself back to his feet. The cloak steadied him, and he nodded gratefully to it. Your warp is emotion made manifest, right? So I gave it a perfect reflection of itself, infinite recursion, a loop with no escape. It'll wear off eventually once I'm not actively maintaining it, but for a few seconds there, it was its own prison. Thelonious approached slowly, his force sword still active. You should be dead. Or possessed, or worse. You dropped your shields completely. That is suicide against a demon. In your paradigm, yes, Strange said. But I don't fight demons the way you do. I don't see them as pure evil to be destroyed. I see them as phenomena to be understood, analyzed, and countered with precision. Like a surgeon cutting out a tumor, you need to understand the anatomy first. The Space Marine studied him for a long moment, then deactivated his force sword. You are either the most brilliant psyker I have ever encountered, or the most dangerously arrogant. Perhaps both. The blast doors opened, and Inquisitor Vokos entered, her retinue behind her. Her expression was unreadable, but Strange saw calculation in her human eye and what might have been hunger in her augmetic lens. Codicere Thelonious, she said formally. Your assessment? The Space Marine's jaw tightened. The sorcerer is sanctionable. His methods are unorthodox, his techniques unknown to Imperial doctrine, but his discipline is beyond question. He represents no immediate chaos threat. High praise from a blood raven, Vokos said dryly. She turned to Strange. It seems you live, sorcerer. Congratulations. You've just become the Imperium's most valuable and most closely watched asset in this sector. I want answers, Strange said flatly. I've proven I'm not a threat. Now you owe me information. What is the warp? Who is the Emperor? And what the hell kind of universe have I fallen into? Vokos smiled, a cold, predatory expression. Oh, you'll get your answers, Doctor Strange. And then you're going to wish you'd died in that proving ground. Because once you understand the true horror of the 41st millennium, you'll realize that your clever tricks and dimensional knowledge might not be enough to survive it. She gestured, and servitors began wheeling in data slates, hololith projectors, and ancient tomes bound in what Strange desperately hoped wasn't human skin. Welcome to Warhammer 40,000, sorcerer. Class is now in session. And the first lesson is simple. In the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war. The briefing chamber was a monument to paranoia-made architecture. Every surface was inscribed with wards, prayers, and hexagrammic symbols. Servo skulls floated at precise intervals, their eye lenses tracking movement with machine precision. A hololith projector dominated the center of the room, currently displaying a slowly rotating image of a galaxy consumed by war. Strange stood before it, the cloak hanging motionless from his shoulders, and tried to process what he was being shown. It was too much, too vast, too horrifying. "The Imperium of Man," Vokos narrated, her voice clinical, "spans 1,000,000 worlds across the galaxy. 10,000 years ago, the Emperor of Mankind, the most powerful psyker ever born, united humanity under a singular vision, the complete and total dominance of the galaxy. He created the Space Marines, genetically engineered super soldiers drawn from his own genetic legacy. He built the Astronomicon, a psychic lighthouse that allows ships to navigate the warp. He was, in every meaningful sense, a god walking among men." Was? Strange caught the past tense. The hololith shifted, showing an immense golden throne surrounded by machinery that looked like it belonged in a torture museum. A skeletal figure sat upon it, barely recognizable as human, connected to 10,000 cables and life support systems. "The Emperor was betrayed during the Horus Heresy," Thelonious continued, his voice heavy with barely suppressed rage. "His favored son, Warmaster Horus, was corrupted by the Chaos Gods, entities of the warp who embody humanity's darkest emotions. Half the Space Marine legions turned traitor, planets burned. The Imperium nearly fell. In the final battle, the Emperor slew Horus but was mortally wounded. For 10,000 years he has sat upon the golden throne, neither living nor dead, sustained by the sacrifice of 1,000 psychers every single day." Strange's stomach turned. "You're feeding him souls? 1,000 people daily?" "To maintain the Astronomicon," Vokos said flatly. "Without it, warp travel becomes impossible. The Imperium fragments. Humanity dies. The Emperor's sacrifice allows trillions to survive. It is the most pragmatic act of mercy in human history." "That's not mercy," Strange said quietly. "That's industrialized murder dressed up as necessity." Mago Zenith's mechadendrites twitched with agitation. "The sorcerer demonstrates insufficient data comprehension. Illustrative clarification required." The hololith shifted again. This time it showed the warp itself, a roiling sea of nightmare colors, screaming faces made of energy, titanic entities that dwarfed planets. Strange recognized the demon he'd faced in the proving ground, magnified 1,000,000-fold, one tendril of something vastly larger. "The warp," Vokos continued, "is not merely a dimension. It is a reflection of every sentient emotion in the galaxy. Every fear, every rage, every ambition and despair feeds it. And within the warp dwell the Chaos Gods. Khorne, god of war and bloodshed. Tzeentch, god of change and sorcery. Nurgle, god of decay and despair. Slaanesh, god of excess and sensation. They are not metaphors. They are literal, conscious entities with the power to reshape reality itself. The hololith showed worlds drowning in demonic incursions, entire systems consumed by warp storms, populations sacrificed or corrupted en masse. "Every psyker is a doorway," Thelonious said grimly. "Every untrained mind touching the warp is a potential breach point for demonic invasion. That is why we bind psychers so tightly, why we execute those who cannot be controlled, why the Imperium is so ruthless with witches, because the alternative is planetary extinction." Strange felt his worldview cracking. In his universe, magic was dangerous, but manageable. Entities could be bargained with, dimensions sealed, threats contained. Here, the entire metaphysical infrastructure of reality was hostile. Using psychic power wasn't just risky. It was a form of Russian roulette where 5 chambers were loaded. "How do you survive this?" he asked. "How has humanity lasted 10,000 years in this meat grinder?" "Faith," Vokos said simply. She gestured, and the hololith showed armies of soldiers in drab uniforms, billions strong, charging into certain death against impossible odds. The Imperial Guard, ordinary men and women with laser guns and faith in the Emperor. They die by the millions, but they hold the line. And the Space Marines, the Emperor's angels of death, turn the tide where mortal soldiers cannot. Thelonious stepped forward, his massive form casting shadows across the hololith. But we are not enough. The Imperium is dying, sorcerer. Slowly, inevitably, we lose ground. Chaos corrupts entire sectors. The Tyranids, an extragalactic swarm of bioengineered predators, devour worlds by the dozen. The Necrons, ancient machines older than humanity itself, awaken from their tombs. The Orcs multiply wherever war exists. The Eldar, arrogant Xenos with psychic powers that dwarf most psychers, manipulate events to their own benefit. And the Tau, Magos Zenith added, his mechanical voice carrying a note of disdain. Xenos who preach philosophy of unified cooperation, ideological contamination vector, growing threat despite limited technological output. Strange walked closer to the hololith, watching worlds burn in slow rotation. So the Imperium's answer is faith, fanaticism, and feeding your Emperor souls? That's the plan? That is the reality, Vokos snapped. Do you think we enjoy this? Do you think any of us wouldn't prefer your universe, where magic has rules and demons can be negotiated with? We work with what we have, and what we have is a species clinging to survival against forces that want to devour, corrupt, or exterminate us. Strange turned to face her. Then why are you showing me this? What do you want from me? The Inquisitor's expression shifted, becoming calculating. Because you represent something we've never encountered. A psyker. A sorcerer, whose powers operate on different principles than the warp. Your magic doesn't open doorways to chaos. It doesn't risk possession with every use. You touched a demon directly and emerged uncorrupted. That makes you either a freak anomaly or a weapon, Strange finished. You want to study me, replicate what I do, turn me into a tool against chaos. I want, Vokos said carefully, to determine if your methods can be taught. If the Imperium's psychers could learn to wield their powers with your precision, your discipline, without the constant risk of demonic incursion. She trailed off, but the implications were clear. Strange shook his head. It took me years of training under the Ancient One to master the mystic arts, years of discipline, meditation, study. And even then, I had access to relics, to the Vishanti, to a universe where magic was stable. Here, your warp is actively hostile. I'm operating on fundamentals because everything else is compromised. Then teach us the fundamentals, Thelonious said. His voice carried unexpected intensity. The Librarius trains for decades to achieve the control you demonstrated in the proving ground. If your techniques could be adapted... They can't, Strange interrupted. Not easily. Your psychic training is built on suppression and channeling through faith. My training is built on understanding and precision. They're fundamentally incompatible approaches. But not impossible, Varen interjected. The epistolary had been silent until now, watching with sharp eyes. You've been in this universe less than a day, and you've already adapted your magic to account for warp interference. Given time, resources, access to our archives, I could maybe develop a hybrid approach, Strange admitted reluctantly. Something that bridges the gap between your psychic discipline and my mystical techniques. But it would take time, and I'd need something in return. Name it, Vokos said immediately. Information on dimensional travel, Strange said. Everything you know about warp rifts, webway gates, anything that could help me understand how to create a stable portal back to my universe. I want to go home. The silence that followed was profound. Finally, Magos Zenith spoke. His mechanical voice almost sympathetic. Dimensional transit of magnitude required, 0.03% probability of success. Cross-universal breach, theoretical impossibility per established Mechanicus doctrine. Return to origin point, functionally unachievable. Strange felt ice in his veins. What? The warp is capricious, Thelonious explained gently. Rifts open and close without pattern or reason. Whatever brought you here was a catastrophic intersection of forces that may never align again. And even if they did, navigating the warp to a specific destination, especially a destination in another universe entirely, is beyond the capabilities of even the most skilled navigators. There are legends, Vokos added, of the Webway, an ancient Eldar construction that allows travel through a pocket dimension parallel to the warp, stable, protected tunnels between locations. But the Webway is lost to humanity, its secrets buried in ruins or hoarded by Xenos, who would never share such knowledge. So I'm trapped here, Strange said. It wasn't a question. For the foreseeable future, Vokos confirmed. Which means you have a choice, sorcerer. You can attempt to survive in the Imperium alone, a rogue psyker hunted by every inquisitor who learns of your existence. Or you can work with us. Teach us what you can, learn what we know, and perhaps together we can achieve something neither could accomplish separately. Strange looked around the chamber, at the Space Marine librarians with their brutal psychic discipline, at the Inquisitor with her pragmatic ruthlessness, at the Magos with his inhuman logic. They were the products of a universe that had beaten humanity into a shape that could survive the grinding horror of the 41st millennium, and they were offering him a place in that struggle. I need to think, Strange said finally. I need to process what you've shown me and decide if I can live with the compromises your survival requires. You have 6 hours, Vokos said. After that, I need to report to my superiors that I've either sanctioned you as an Imperial asset or executed you as a potential chaos threat. There is no third option. She left, her retinue following. The Space Marines remained, watching Strange with expressions that ranged from cautious hope to wary suspicion. Strange turned back to the hololith, watching the galaxy burn in slow motion, and wondered if there was any magic powerful enough to save a universe that had already decided its only salvation was endless war. The cloak settled around him like a comfort, and Strange closed his eyes, seeking the center of calm that had sustained him through every crisis in his life. He would need it, because the choice Vokos had given him wasn't really a choice at all. It was a test of whether he could adapt to a reality where hope itself was a weapon, and mercy was measured in the millions instead of the individual. Strange didn't sleep. He couldn't. Instead, he sat in the assigned quarters, a sparse cell barely larger than the holding cage, but without the wards, and attempted something he'd sworn not to try again: astral projection into the warp. The risk was catastrophic, but he needed to understand this universe on a level deeper than briefings and lectures could provide. He needed to see the metaphysical architecture of this reality with his own trained perception, to map the differences between his dimension and this nightmare. The cloak wrapped protectively around his physical body as Strange's consciousness separated from his flesh. The astral plane in his universe was peaceful, a realm of thought and spirit, dangerous but navigable with proper training. Here, the moment his consciousness touched the boundary between real space and the Immaterium, he understood why the Imperium was so terrified of psychers. The warp was screaming. Billions of voices, human and Xenos and things that had never been mortal, all compressed into a roiling sea of emotion so concentrated it had achieved sentience. Strange's astral form recoiled, throwing up every defense he knew, but the pressure was immense. It was like being at the bottom of an ocean, except the ocean was made of rage and fear and desperate hope all twisted together, and things were swimming in it. Demons, yes, he could see them now, countless entities ranging from minor imps to vast god shards that dwarfed solar systems. But there were other things, too. Fragments of mortal souls lost in the warp, screaming for eternity. Psychic echoes of ancient wars. And something else, geometries that existed in too many dimensions, patterns that his mind struggled to interpret. Then he felt it, the presence he'd sensed before. It was impossibly distant and simultaneously right beside him. A consciousness so vast that calling it human was like calling the ocean a puddle. It burned with purpose and pain in equal measure, a psychic lighthouse that held back the darkness through sheer force of will alone. The Emperor. Strange didn't try to communicate. He simply observed, his mystical training allowing him to analyze the structure of that immense presence. And what he saw made him understand the true horror of the Imperium's predicament. The Emperor wasn't just sustaining the Astronomicon. He was holding together a psychic dam that prevented the warp from flooding into real space entirely. Every moment of every day for 10,000 years, the Emperor had been waging a war in the deepest layers of reality, fighting off chaos gods and their legions with nothing but his own indomitable will. And he was losing. Strange could see the cracks, tiny fractures in the psychic infrastructure the Emperor had built. Each one was being held closed through enormous effort, but there were too many. The dam wasn't breaking, not yet, but the pressure was building. The Imperium's brutality suddenly made a terrible kind of sense. They weren't evil for evil's sake. They were a species clinging to survival by their fingernails, making impossible choices because every alternative led to extinction. A presence brushed against Strange's astral form, not hostile, but curious. He turned and found himself facing himself. No, not himself. An Eldar. The alien wore armor of bone white and blue, its features elegant and ancient, its psychic presence refined to a degree that put most human psychers to shame. It studied Strange with eyes that held millennia of experience. "You are new," the Eldar communicated directly, thoughts flowing in elegant pulses. "New to this galaxy, new to the great ocean. Yet you navigate its currents with unusual grace." "Who are you?" Strange projected back. "Farseer Eldorath Starbane of Craftworld Alatok. I felt your arrival, a ripple in fate's threads that does not belong. You are from beyond, are you not? From a place where the great ocean does not exist." Strange hesitated, then nodded. There was no point in lying to a being who could apparently read probability itself. "Interesting," Eldorath mused. "The Monkig Imperium believes it has found a weapon. They see your abilities and think only of how to exploit them. But you are not a weapon, Stephen Strange. You are a variable, and variables change outcomes. You know my name. I have walked many paths through time's river. In some, you ally with the Imperium and die destroying a chaos artifact. In others, you reject them and are hunted to extinction within a year. In others, still." The Farseer paused, and Strange felt genuine uncertainty radiating from the ancient being. "In others, you do something I cannot predict, and that terrifies and excites me in equal measure. What do you want from me?" "Nothing. Yet. But know this. The Imperium will use you until you break, then dispose of your remains. It is their nature. But there are other powers in this galaxy. Other paths. The Aeldari remember when magic was an art, not a curse. When the warp was a tool, not a predator. What changed? Eldorath's presence darkened with ancient shame. We did. My people's hubris birthed Slaanesh, the youngest and most terrible of the Chaos Gods. Our empire of pleasure and excess became so extreme that it tore a wound in reality itself. The Eye of Terror. You will learn of it. A place where the warp bleeds into real space permanently. Trillions of my people died in a single psychic scream. We are a dying race now, clinging to survival in our craft worlds, paying for sins committed before humanity even reached the stars. Strange absorbed this, pieces clicking into place. So the warp wasn't always like this. It was corrupted. Made hostile. It is a mirror, sorcerer. It reflects the emotions of those who live in real space. When the galaxy was younger, less populated, less scarred by war. The warp was calmer. But 10,000 years of constant conflict, of endless hatred and fear and despair have fed the chaos gods until they are powerful enough to challenge reality itself. Can it be healed? The Farseer's psychic laugh was bitter. In a billion years, perhaps, if every sentient being in the galaxy achieved perfect emotional tranquility simultaneously. But that is fantasy. The warp is what it is now. We can only navigate its currents and hope not to drown. Then why tell me this? Why reveal yourself? Because I have seen threads of fate where you matter, Strange. Where your alien perspective allows you to see solutions we cannot. The Imperium is blind in its dogma. Chaos is blind in its malevolence. The Eldari are blind in our grief. But you... Eldorath's presence flickered with something like hope. You are blind only in your ignorance of this galaxy, and ignorance can be cured. Before Strange could respond, alarms shrieked through both the warp and real space simultaneously. It comes, Eldorath said simply. The reason I sought you now. Brace yourself, sorcerer. Your education is about to become practical. Strange's astral form snapped back to his body with jarring force. He gasped, eyes flying open, the cloak already pulling him to his feet. Klaxons blared throughout the litany of fury, and the ship's entire structure shuddered. The door to his quarters exploded inward. Thelonious stood there in full battle plate, his force sword already ignited. "Warp breach!" the Space Marine roared. "Chaos incursion, 3 decks below us! Something followed you, sorcerer! A greater demon powerful enough to tear through our Geller fields!" Strange's blood ran cold. "What kind of demon? Does it matter?" Thelonious grabbed Strange's shoulder with one massive gauntlet. "You wanted to prove your worth. This is your chance. The demon is manifesting in the ship's librarium, targeting our psychic archives. If it succeeds, it will have access to 10,000 years of Imperial psychic knowledge. We cannot allow that." Strange was already moving, following the Space Marine through corridors filled with rushing crew and servitors. What am I walking into? "A Lord of Change," Thelonious said grimly. "Greater demon of Tzeentch. Reality-warping sorcery, precognitive abilities, cunning that surpasses mortal comprehension. It will know we're coming. It will have planned for us, and it will specifically target you because you are the unknown variable it cannot predict." They burst into a transit corridor just as reality tore open ahead of them. The demon was magnificent and horrifying in equal measure. It stood 4 meters tall, covered in iridescent feathers that shifted through colors that didn't exist. Its body somewhere between bird and serpent, and something else entirely. Multiple eyes studded its form, each one seeing through different dimensions of probability. Wings spread wide, crackling with warp energy. And it was laughing. The sorcerer from beyond. Its voice resonated on psychic frequencies that made Strange's teeth ache. "Tzeentch has foreseen this meeting, little magician. The architect of fate knows all paths, all futures. And in every timeline, you are his." "I've heard that before," Strange said, his hands already moving through spell gestures. "Dormammu said something similar. I trapped him in a time loop and bargained until he gave up. What makes you think your god is any different?" The Lord of Change's laughter intensified. "Because here, little sorcerer, time is mine to command. The warp cares nothing for causality. And your tricks? Your clever techniques?" The demon gestured, and reality rewrote itself. Strange found himself standing in the same corridor, but it was different. Thelonious was gone. The crew was gone. He was alone with the demon, and the walls were bleeding colors that screamed. Here, in this pocket of twisted space-time, there are no reinforcements. No Space Marines to hide behind. Just you, me, and the question of whether your discipline can match my god's cunning." Strange felt the cloak coil around him defensively, and reached deep within himself for the core of absolute certainty that had sustained him through every impossible battle. "Let's find out," he said. And the corridor exploded with golden light, as Strange unleashed magic unlike anything the 41st millennium had ever seen. The Lord of Change moved first, and Strange learned immediately that fighting daemons in the 41st millennium was nothing like fighting entities from his own universe. The demon didn't attack. It rewrote. Reality bent around it like water around a stone, except the water was causality itself. Strange threw up shields and found them forming backwards, the spell completing before he'd started the gesture. He tried to anchor himself to the physical laws he understood, and the demon simply changed the laws. "You fight like a mortal," the Lord of Change mocked, its voice echoing from multiple points in time simultaneously. Bound by sequence, cause before effect, action before reaction. How quaint. The corridor stretched, compressed, inverted. Strange found himself standing on the ceiling, then sideways, then in 3 orientations simultaneously. The demon was showing off, demonstrating its complete mastery over this pocket dimension it had created. But Strange had faced impossible odds before, and more importantly, he'd learned something from his brief contact with Farseer Eldorath. The warp was emotion made manifest. This demon was a fragment of Tzeentch, the god of change, of ambition, of plans within plans. So Strange stopped trying to fight it on its terms. He closed his eyes, all of them, physical and mystical, and listened. The demon's presence resonated with specific frequencies. Beneath the reality warping, beneath the mocking laughter, there was a pattern. The Lord of Change was manipulating probability, yes, but it was doing so according to specific rules. Tzeentchian rules. Every change it made served a purpose, furthered some grand design. Strange's photographic memory assembled the pattern in seconds. The demon wasn't just trying to kill him. It was testing him, probing his capabilities. Every reality warp, every temporal twist, was designed to force Strange to reveal the full extent of his magical knowledge. This wasn't a fight. It was an interview. "You want to know what I can do?" Strange said aloud, opening his eyes. "Tzeentch sent you to evaluate whether I'm worth corrupting or if I'm just another dead-end variable." The Lord of Change's multiple eyes fixed on him with sudden intensity. "Clever, clever little sorcerer. Yes. The architect of fate is most interested in you. A magician from a universe where power follows rules, where entities can be bound and bargained with. Such knowledge would be valuable." "Let me guess," Strange continued, his mind racing through calculations. "If I'm strong enough, Tzeentch offers me power in exchange for service. If I'm weak, you kill me and steal my knowledge anyway. And if I'm somewhere in between, you corrupt me slowly, using my desire to go home as leverage." "All paths lead to the changer of ways," the demon confirmed. "But I am curious, sorcerer. You understand what I am. You see the trap. Yet you do not despair. Why?" Strange's hands moved in a complex gesture, but this time he wasn't casting a spell. He was thinking out loud with mystic language, using the hand movements to organize his thoughts the way a chess master might gesture over a board. "Because Tzeentch made a mistake," Strange said. "Your god is so focused on complexity, on plans within plans, that it assumes everyone else thinks the same way. But I'm a surgeon. I was trained to cut through complexity and find the simple, elegant solution. And the solution here is obvious." The demon leaned forward, genuinely intrigued. "Do tell." "You're not invincible in this pocket dimension. You're maintaining it through constant effort, burning through warp energy to keep the reality warping active. Every moment we talk, you're spending power. And you isolated me specifically, cut me off from Thelonious and the Space Marines, because you knew that fighting multiple opponents would drain you faster. Strange's hands completed the gesture, and golden light flared around his fingers. So I don't need to beat you in a direct confrontation. I just need to make you waste enough energy that your pocket dimension collapses. And the best way to waste an opponent's energy is to make them defend. He struck. Not at the demon, at the pocket dimension itself. Strange's spell was simple. A variation on the mirror technique he'd used against the Screamer, but scaled up and inverted. Instead of reflecting the demon's nature back at itself, he was creating thousands of false targets. Copies of himself that flickered in and out of existence across multiple probability states, each one potentially real. The Lord of Change snarled, its beautiful features twisting with frustration. It lashed out with warp fire that burned through dimensions, incinerating the false Stranges, but each time it struck, it had to spend power analyzing probability to determine if it had hit the real target. Surgical precision, Strange said from behind the demon. Or was it in front? The copies made it impossible to tell. That's what separates a master from an amateur. You're powerful, but you're spending power inefficiently. I'm weaker, but every move I make is calculated for maximum effect. The demon roared and reality splimmed apart. The corridor became a kaleidoscope of fractured space-time, each shard showing a different possible outcome. In one, Strange burned. In another, he was corrupted, his eyes glowing with chaos light. In a third, he knelt willingly before Tzeentch's throne. Enough, the Lord of Change thundered. You are clever, sorcerer, but cleverness is my domain. The architect sees all possibilities, knows all outcomes. You cannot surprise us. Can't I? Strange said quietly. And he did something the demon, and Tzeentch itself, genuinely hadn't predicted. He stopped fighting. Strange dismissed his shields, banished the false copies, and stood completely undefended in the center of the fractured reality. The cloak hung limp from his shoulders, not protecting him at all. The Lord of Change froze, its multiple eyes widening in confusion and suspicion. What is this? Some trick? No trick, Strange said. I'm calling your bluff. You said you were here to evaluate me, to see if I'm worth corrupting. Well, here I am, completely exposed. If Tzeentch really sees all possibilities, all outcomes, then your god already knows whether I'll accept corruption or not. So either kill me now, or admit that I'm not predictable even to the architect of fate. The daemon's form rippled with uncertainty, an emotion Strange suspected it rarely experienced. You would gamble your life on this assumption? I've gambled worse, Strange said, thinking of the time loop with Dormammu, of dying thousands of times to save his world. And I've learned something about entities like you. Beings of pure purpose and power always have the same weakness. You can't comprehend someone who acts against their own self-interest. Tzeentch is ambition incarnate. But what happens when you encounter someone who doesn't want power? Who would rather die than compromise their principles? The Lord of Change stared at him, and Strange saw something shift in those alien eyes. Recognition. And beneath it, something that might have been respect. You are interesting, the demon said slowly. The architect's plans for you are elaborate, spanning centuries of potential corruption and eventual service. But you have shown me something unexpected. Not power, not cunning, but certainty. The pocket dimension began to collapse, reality reasserting itself. Through the fragmenting space-time, Strange could see Thelonious and a full squad of Space Marine librarians charging toward them, force weapons blazing. This is not over, Stephen Strange, the Lord of Change said. Its form was already dissipating, returning to the warp. Tzeentch has infinite patience, and your certainty will be tested in ways you cannot imagine. The architect will offer you what you most desire, a way home, and you will learn that even the strongest principles can bend when hope is the lever. I've resisted temptation before, Strange said. But never for 10,000 years, the demon whispered as it vanished. Never in a universe where hope itself is heresy. We shall see, sorcerer. We shall see. The pocket dimension shattered completely. Strange stumbled as normal reality snapped back into place. Thelonious caught him with one massive arm, his force sword still crackling with energy. "Where is it?" the Space Marine demanded. "The demon! Where did it go?" "Back to the warp," Strange said, his voice hoarse. "It wasn't here to kill me. It was here to make an offer." "And?" Vokos's voice crackled through Vox. She was watching from the security feeds, Strange realized. Probably had been the entire time. Strange met Thelonious's eyes. "I told it to go to hell." Which is ironic, considering it probably came from something worse. The Space Marine's expression shifted. Surprise, then approval, then something like grim satisfaction. "You faced a Lord of Change alone and emerged uncorrupted. That is, unprecedented for an unsanctioned psyker." "I'm not a psyker," Strange corrected tiredly. "But I'm beginning to understand why you're all so terrified of them." Alarms continued to blare throughout the ship. Damage control teams rushed past, servitors already beginning repairs on the sections warped by the demon's presence. The cost of a single demonic incursion was staggering. Strange counted at least 20 dead crew members, sections of hull that would need complete replacement, systems corrupted by warp taint, and this was considered a minor incursion, successfully repelled. "The Inquisitor wants to see you," Thelonious said. "Immediately." Strange nodded, too exhausted to argue. The cloak wrapped around him supportively, and he followed the Space Marines through corridors that still smelled of ozone and unreality. He'd survived his first real test in the 41st millennium. But the Lord of Change's final words echoed in his mind. Never, for 10,000 years. How long could he maintain his principles in a universe designed to break them? He was about to find out. The war room was thick with incense smoke and tension. Strange stood at the center of a circle of Imperial officers, Inquisitors, and Space Marines, all of them studying him with expressions ranging from grudging respect to outright suspicion. The briefing had lasted 3 hours, and his legs were beginning to ache from standing still for so long. "Let me understand this correctly," said Lord Inquisitor Malvius, a gaunt man whose augmetic replacements outnumbered his organic parts 3-1. "A Lord of Change manifested specifically to recruit you. It offered you knowledge, power, and potentially a way home, and you refused." "I told it to leave," Strange said. "There's a difference." Semantics. Malvius's mechadendrite fingers drummed on the tactical display. "The question is whether this represents strategic opportunity or catastrophic liability. Tzeentch does not waste resources on dead ends. If the Architect of Fate finds you interesting, it means you represent a potential vector for corruption. Or, Vokos interjected, it means the sorcerer possesses capabilities that genuinely threaten chaos. Why else would Tzeentch attempt immediate recruitment rather than simply killing him?" "Because Tzeentch is playing a longer game," said Codicier Thelonious. The Space Marine had been standing silent throughout most of the briefing, but now he stepped forward. The demon's final words were clear. It intends to test the sorcerer's resolve over time. Offer him what he wants most when he is weakest. That is the Changer's preferred method. Strange felt every eye in the room turn to him. "What I want most," he said carefully, "is to go home. But I'm not naive enough to think Tzeentch would actually help me achieve that. Any offer from a chaos god would come with strings attached. Strings that would damn my soul and potentially my entire universe." "Your universe," Malvius said slowly. "This concerns me. If chaos could access your reality, use you as a bridge." "They can't," Strange said with more confidence than he felt. "The dimensional barriers are fundamentally different. The warp doesn't exist in my universe. Or if it does, it operates under completely different metaphysical laws. Any attempt to breach through would require power on a scale that even chaos gods might not possess. Might, Malvius repeated. This is insufficient certainty. Then execute me now, Strange said flatly. The room went dead silent. If I'm such a catastrophic risk, put a bolt round through my skull and be done with it. But stop pretending this is about determining my loyalty. You've already made up your minds one way or another. Vokos's lips curved in something that wasn't quite a smile. Bold words for a man surrounded by guns. I've been surrounded by worse, Strange said, and I'm tired of being treated like a specimen under glass. I've proven I'm not corrupted. I've demonstrated unique capabilities against demons. I've offered to share my knowledge with your librarians. What more do you want? Lord Inquisitor Malvius leaned forward, his augmetic eyes glowing red in the incense smoke. We want to know if you can be trusted when the stakes are absolute. Words and demonstrations are insufficient. We require proof of commitment. A mission, Thelonious said. He activated the tactical hololith, and a star system appeared above the display table. The Forge world of Mazoa in the Calixis sector. 3 weeks ago, it went dark. All Vox communications ceased. Astropathic Choir went silent. The Mechanicus is reporting catastrophic system failure, but preliminary augury suggests warp contamination. Strange studied the hololithic display. The Forge world was massive, an entire planet converted into a factory complex, its surface covered in manufactorums, refineries, and arcane machinery. You want me to investigate a potentially chaos-corrupted industrial world, Strange said. With what support? A kill team of space marines from the Death Watch, Vokos said. Veterans of Xenos combat, trained in surgical strikes. Codicier Thelonious will accompany as psychic support. Your mission is threefold. Determine the nature of the corruption, eliminate or contain the source, and retrieve Archmagus Vathek if he still lives. A secondary hololith appeared, showing an ancient figure more machine than human, festooned with mechadendrites and bearing the skull and cog symbol of the Adeptus Mechanicus. Archmagos Vathek is one of the Omnissiah's chosen, Magos Zenith added, his mechanical voice carrying unusual emotion. His knowledge of standard template construct fragments is unparalleled. His loss would be catastrophic for Imperial technological advancement. Strange looked at the corrupted Forge world and understood immediately what they were doing. This was a suicide mission dressed up as a test. Either he succeeded and proved his value, or he died and the problem of his existence was solved. When do we leave? He asked. Immediately, Vokos said. The Thunderhawk is already being prepared. You have 30 minutes to requisition equipment and prepare yourself. Strange nodded and turned to leave, then paused. One question. If I succeed, if I retrieve this Archmagos and cleanse whatever corruption is there, will you help me research dimensional travel? Not promise to help. Actually dedicate resources to understanding how I might return home? The Inquisitors exchanged glances. Finally, Malvius spoke. If you succeed, Sorcerer, we will grant you access to the Black Library's coordinates. Strange's breath caught. What's the Black Library? Thelonious's expression was grave. An Eldar repository of forbidden knowledge hidden in the webway. It contains information on the warp, on chaos, on dimensional travel that predates humanity's rise. It is the single most dangerous collection of lore in the galaxy, and it is utterly inaccessible to anyone except the Eldar themselves. Except, Vokos added, we have recently acquired intelligence suggesting a potential entry point. A webway gate, dormant but intact, hidden in the underhive of Tertius Prime. If anyone could navigate such a place and survive to retrieve the knowledge you seek, it would be someone with your unique capabilities. Strange understood the subtext immediately. They were offering him the one thing he wanted most, a potential path home, in exchange for risking his life on an impossible mission. It was manipulation of the highest order. It was also his best chance. "I'll do it," Strange said, "but I want one thing added to the agreement. If I die on this mission, someone tries to continue the research, someone investigates that webway gate. Because if there's even a chance it could help defend against chaos, it's worth pursuing." "Acceptable," Malvius said. "But understand this, sorcerer. If you are corrupted on Mazoa, if you return tainted by chaos, we will not hesitate to execute you. Mercy is a luxury the Imperium cannot afford." "I wouldn't expect anything less," Strange said. He left the war room with Thelonious following behind, the Space Marine's heavy footsteps echoing through the corridor. "You know this is a test you are not meant to pass," Thelonious said quietly once they were out of earshot. "I know," Strange replied, "but I've spent my life beating impossible odds. This is just another surgery, except instead of a patient, I'm trying to save a planet. The principles are the same. Diagnose the problem, cut out the corruption, close the wound." "Mazoa is not a patient," Thelonious said grimly. "It is a tomb. Whatever corrupted it is powerful enough to silence an entire Forge world, millions of tech priests, defensive systems that could repel fleet invasions, war machines that have not failed in millennia. If we go there, we may not return." Strange stopped and turned to face the Space Marine. "Then why are you coming with me?" Thelonious was silent for a long moment. Finally, "Because I have seen what you can do. I have touched your mind and found it clean of taint, despite impossible exposure to demonic influence. And I believe that if anyone can survive what waits on Mazoa, it is the sorcerer from beyond who fought a lord of change and emerged uncorrupted." He placed one massive hand on Strange's shoulder, not threatening, but almost fraternal. "Besides," the Space Marine continued, "the Librarius has long debated whether there could be another path to psychic discipline, one that does not require such brutal suppression of emotion, such constant warfare against the warp. If you truly can teach us your methods, it could save countless lives. That is worth risking mine." Strange nodded slowly. "Then we'd better survive. I'd hate to waste a good student." They continued down the corridor toward the armory. Behind them, through blast doors and bulkheads, Strange could feel the psychic weight of the Imperium pressing down like an ocean. A trillion souls crying out in faith, fear, and desperate hope. He was going to walk into a chaos-corrupted industrial world with a squad of super soldiers and try to pull off a miracle. Just another Tuesday for the Sorcerer Supreme. Except here in the 41st millennium, there was no going back, no safe retreat to the Sanctum, no backup from the Avengers or other heroes, just him, his magic, and the brutal calculus of survival in a galaxy that wanted him dead or corrupted. The cloak settled on his shoulders with unusual weight, as if it too understood the stakes. Strange squared his shoulders and walked toward the hangar bay, toward the Thunderhawk waiting to carry him to hell itself. Time to see if Earth's Sorcerer Supreme could survive becoming the Imperium's unwilling champion. The Forge world of Mazoa was dying. Strange saw it through the Thunderhawk's viewport as they descended through the planet's polluted atmosphere. A world-spanning factory complex gone dark, its forge furnaces extinguished, its plasma reactors cold. Where there should have been the amber glow of industry burning eternally, there was only sickly green luminescence pulsing from the planet's equatorial regions like an infected wound. "Warp contamination confirmed," said Kill Team leader Artemius through his helmet Vox. The Deathwatch veteran's black armor was scarred from decades of Xenos combat, his shoulder pad bearing the white icon of his home chapter, the Ultramarines. "Geiger warp readings are off the scale. Whatever happened here wasn't subtle." Strange closed his eyes and extended his mystical senses. The psychic stench hit him immediately, not the chaotic madness of Tzeentch, but something else. Decay, despair, acceptance of inevitable entropy. "Nurgle," he said quietly. Thelonious, sitting across from him in full Terminator armor, nodded grimly. The plague god. His corruption spreads like disease, slowly, inevitably, turning hope itself into rot. If Mazoa has fallen to Nurgle's embrace, the entire planet may be beyond salvation. The Thunderhawk shuddered as it entered the lower atmosphere. Through the viewport, Strange could see the surface now. Manufactorums covered in pustulant growth, pipelines burst and leaking substances that moved with disturbing purpose. Servitors wandering aimlessly through streets choked with fungal blooms that shouldn't exist in a sterile forge environment. "Landing zone is compromised," the pilot voxed back. "Setting down at secondary coordinates, Manufactorum Theta 7. Auspex shows no life signs but significant bioorganic contamination." The Thunderhawk touched down with a hiss of hydraulics. The assault ramp dropped, and Strange's first breath of Mazoa's air made him gag despite the rebreather Thelonious had insisted he wear. The smell was overwhelming, sweet rot mixed with chemical waste and something else, something that registered on mystical senses as pure corruption. The kill team deployed with practiced efficiency. 5 Death Watch Space Marines in addition to Artemius and Thelonious, warriors drawn from different chapters but united in purpose. Their bolters swept the landing zone, targeting systems painting anything that moved with red threat markers. Strange stepped onto the surface and immediately felt wrongness seep through his boots. The metal deck plating was covered in a thin layer of slime that pulsed with faint bioluminescence. Fungal growths erupted from every seam and crack, spreading with visible speed even as he watched. "Life signs ahead," announced Brother Kale, the kill team's scanner specialist. "Multiple contacts. Humanoid, but off. Vitals are wrong. Too slow. Too weak." They advanced through the silent manufactorum, weapons raised. The facility should have been deafening with industry. Instead, it was filled with wet, organic sounds. Dripping, gurgling, the slow breathing of something vast. They found the first tech priest in what had been a control center. It, was still alive, technically. Fused to his control throne by fungal growth, his augmetic parts corroded and overgrown with pustulant blooms. His remaining organic eye tracked their movement with dull awareness. "Omnissiah, preserve," the tech priest wheezed through ruined vox grills. "The gift has been received." "Gift?" Strange stepped closer despite Thelonious's warning hand. "What gift? What happened here?" The tech priest's corrupted eye focused on Strange, and something like recognition flickered there. "The stranger. Yes, grandfather saw you coming. Planned for you." Strange's blood ran cold. "Nurgle knew I was coming?" "Grandfather knows. All suffering. All entropy. You will understand. Soon." The tech priest's remaining flesh dissolved into slurry, his mechanical parts collapsing into the fungal mass that had claimed him. Strange stepped back, disturbing knowledge crystallizing in his mind. This wasn't a random corruption. This was a trap. "We need to abort," Strange said urgently. "This is specifically designed to—" The manufactorum shook. Somewhere deep below, something massive moved. "Contact!" Brother Kale shouted. "Multiple signatures, converging on our position from all directions." They came from the walls themselves. Plague Marines, Chaos Space Marines, sworn to Nurgle, their armor corroded and covered in filth, their bodies swollen with disease. But these weren't the shambling corpses Strange expected. They moved with terrible purpose, and their weapons were trained with disturbing accuracy. "For the Plague Father!" one roared, and opened fire. The Death Watch responded instantly, bolter fire tearing through corrupted armor. Strange threw up shields, golden light flickering as warp-tainted bullets impacted. The cloak whipped out, deflecting rounds that would have taken his head off. Thelonius's force sword carved through the first plague marine with psychic fire, but two more replaced it immediately. The kill team formed a defensive circle, their decades of combat experience showing as they coordinated fields of fire without needing words. But they were being pushed back, driven toward the center of the manufactorum. "It's hurting us!" Artemius voxed. "Fall back to secondary position!" They retreated through corridors that pulsed with organic life, each step taking them deeper into the corrupted facility. Strange's mystical senses screamed warnings. They were walking into the heart of whatever had claimed Mazoa, and it wanted them there. The corridor opened into a vast chamber, what had been the primary forge cathedral, where plasma reactors once burned with holy machine fire. Now it was transformed into something obscene, a garden of flesh and metal, where corrupted machinery grew like trees and disease spread like flowers. And at the center, seated on a throne of fused bodies and rusted iron, was Archmagus Vathek, or what remained of him. The ancient tech priest had become something else. His mechanical augmentations were overgrown with demonic biology, pistons and circuits fused with diseased flesh. Antlers of corroded metal sprouted from his head, his remaining organic parts bloated with Nurgle's gifts. But his eyes, human once, now yellow and multi-pupilled, held terrible awareness. "Doctor Strange," Vathek said, his voice a chorus of biological and mechanical tones. "The grandfather sends his greetings. He has been most curious about you." Strange raised his hands defensively, golden light sparking. "You're not Vathek anymore. You're a puppet." "I am perfected," Vathek corrected gently. "The weakness of flesh overcome. The hubris of the machine cult revealed. Grandfather Nurgle showed me the truth, that entropy cannot be fought, only embraced. Decay is the natural state. Death is transformation. Why resist?" "Because life matters," Strange said. "Because every moment stolen by disease is a moment someone could have loved, created, experienced joy. Your grandfather doesn't offer acceptance. He offers surrender." Vathek's laughter was wet and horrible. "And yet you are here, sorcerer, in a trap designed specifically for you. Grandfather Nurgle knows your type. Healers, physicians, those who fight desperately against the inevitable. He takes special pleasure in teaching such souls the futility of resistance." The ground beneath Strange's feet erupted. Tendrils of diseased flesh shot upward, wrapping around his legs, his arms, pulling him down into the corrupted metal. The cloak fought back, slashing with its edges. But there were too many. The tendrils were infused with demonic essence, resistant to his magic. The Death Watch opened fire on Vathek, but their bolts exploded harmlessly against psychic shields maintained by corrupted tech priests emerging from the walls, dozens of them, their bodies transformed into living conduits for Nurgle's power. Thelonius carved through the nearest with his force sword, psychic fire burning away corruption, but more kept coming. The kill team was being overwhelmed by sheer numbers. Strange felt the tendrils pulling him deeper, felt disease trying to seep into his body through every point of contact. His mystical defenses were holding, barely, but the psychic weight of Nurgle's presence was enormous. Not the clever manipulation of Tzeentch, but something more insidious, patient, inevitable as the grave itself. "Stop fighting," a voice whispered. Not in his ears, but directly into his soul. Grandfather Nurgle's presence, vast and almost gentle. "You are weary, Stephen Strange. You seek to return home, but home is lost to you. Why exhaust yourself in hopeless struggle? Rest. Accept. I will ease your suffering." For one terrible moment, Strange felt the temptation. He was exhausted, stranded in a nightmare universe with no clear path back to his reality. Fighting battles against enemies that couldn't be permanently defeated in a galaxy already drowning in darkness. What was the point? Then he remembered why he'd become a doctor in the first place. Not to accept death, but to fight it. Not to surrender to disease, but to cut it out with surgical precision. Strange stopped struggling against the tendrils. "You're right," he said aloud. "I can't fight entropy. Death is inevitable. Decay is natural." Thelonious, locked in combat with corrupted tech priests, spared him a horrified glance. "But," Strange continued, his voice hardening, "just because something is inevitable doesn't mean I give up early. I took an oath as a physician. First, do no harm. And you, Nurgle, are harm incarnate. You're not natural death. You're death worshipped. Death made into tyranny. You take the mercy of ending and twist it into eternal suffering." Golden light exploded from Strange's body. Not outward, inward. He pulled his mystical energy tight, compressing it into a single point of absolute clarity and purpose. The surgical technique the Ancient One had taught him, refined over years of practice. Find the infection. Isolate it. Cut it out. The tendrils holding him screamed, an impossible sound from diseased flesh, as Strange's magic burned through them like a cauterizing laser. But he wasn't attacking the physical corruption. He was attacking the demonic essence animating it, severing the connection between Nurgle's power and the material it had claimed. Vathek roared, rising from his throne. "Impossible! You cannot simply cut away the grandfather's gifts!" "Watch me," Strange said. His hands moved in the most complex series of gestures he'd ever attempted. Not a binding, not a banishment. Something else entirely. He was performing surgery on reality itself. The corrupted chamber was an infected wound in the fabric of space. Nurgle's power had seeped through, turning machine flesh into demonic tissue. But beneath the corruption, the original structure remained. Warped, yes, but not completely destroyed. Strange found the boundary where Mazoa's reality ended and Nurgle's corruption began. And with the precision of a neurosurgeon operating on the most delicate brain tissue, he began cutting them apart. Golden light spread through the chamber in geometric patterns, each line a precisely calculated severing of demonic essence from physical matter. Where the light touched, corruption withered and died, not burned away, but simply ceased to exist as the connection sustaining it was cut. "No!" Vathek shrieked. The Archmagos lunged at Strange, but Thelonious intercepted him, force sword crashing against corrupted mechadendrites. "Finish the working!" the Space Marine roared. "I will hold him!" Strange poured everything he had into the spell. Sweat poured down his face. Blood dripped from his nose. Every mystical technique he'd ever learned, every ounce of discipline and will focused on this single impossible task. Separate the infection from the host. Save what can be saved. Accept what must be lost. The chamber convulsed. Vathek screamed as Nurgle's gifts were torn away from him, his demonic augmentations dissolving, revealing the withered organic body beneath. The corrupted tech priests collapsed as their connection to the plague god was severed. The fungal growths blackened and died. And deep in the warp, Strange felt something vast and ancient turn its attention fully upon him. Nurgle's presence, amused and patient. "Well done, little physician." The plague. God's voice rumbled through dimensions. "You have saved this one world. But I have infinite patience, and you have revealed your techniques. We will meet again, Stephen Strange, and next time, I will know exactly how to break you." The presence withdrew, and the Manufactorum fell silent. Strange collapsed to his knees, utterly spent. The cloak caught him before he hit the ground. Around him, the Death Watch stood among the bodies of fallen Plague Marines and Tech Priests, their armor dented and scorched but victorious. Vathek lay crumpled near his throne, more corpse than man, but still breathing, still alive. Artemius approached Strange carefully. "Sorcerer, what you did, that was not psychic power. That was something else entirely." "Magic," Strange gasped. "Surgical magic. And it almost killed me." Thelonious knelt beside him, the Space Marine's armor steaming from psychic exertion. But it worked. You saved Mazoa, saved Vathek, proved that chaos corruption can be cut away if the will and precision are sufficient. One world, Strange said bitterly, echoing Nurgle's words, in a galaxy of billions. And it took everything I had. One world is more than most achieve in a lifetime, Thelonious said quietly. The Emperor protects, Sorcerer, and today he protected through you. Strange looked up at the Space Marine, seeing genuine respect in those ice-chip eyes. Maybe, just maybe, he could survive this nightmare universe after all. If it didn't break him first. The journey back to the Litany of Fury took 3 days. 3 days for Strange to recover from the mystical exertion that had nearly killed him. 3 days for the Death Watch to secure what remained of Mazoa's critical systems and evacuate the surviving tech priests, those few whose augmetics could be cleansed, whose flesh wasn't too corrupted to save. Archmagos Vathek survived, though calling it survival was generous. He was a husk, barely clinging to life, his centuries of accumulated augmentations stripped away by Nurgle's corruption and Strange's surgical severing. But he was alive, and his mind remained intact. The Mechanicus would rebuild him, and the knowledge he possessed would be preserved. It was, by the Imperium's brutal standards, a complete victory. Strange stood in the observation deck of the Litany of Fury, watching the warp streams flow past the ship's Geller field in impossible colors. The cloak hung from his shoulders, unusually still. They were both exhausted in ways that went beyond the physical. "You're thinking of leaving," Thelonious said from behind him. The Space Marine had approached in complete silence, a feat for someone in full power armor that spoke to decades of practiced stealth. Strange didn't turn. "Can you blame me? I came to this universe by accident. I've been interrogated, tested, nearly corrupted by 2 different chaos gods, and used as a weapon against threats I barely understand. The Inquisitors promised me information about the Black Library if I succeeded. I succeeded, so yes, I'm thinking about taking that information and disappearing into the webway to find my own way home." "You would not survive 3 days alone in the webway," Thelonious said bluntly. "It is a labyrinth older than human civilization, filled with dangers that would make Mazoa look tame. The Eldar who built it barely understand it themselves anymore, and even if you reached the Black Library, its guardians would kill you before you could access its archives." "Then I'll die trying," Strange said. "At least it would be on my terms, not as some sanctioned Imperial asset bleeding myself dry one impossible mission at a time." Thelonious was silent for a long moment. Then, "I understand your frustration, but I ask you to consider something. What you did on Mazoa, that surgical precision against demonic corruption, no psyker in the Imperium can replicate it. The Librarius has spent 10,000 years developing techniques to resist chaos. You have shown us something we never imagined possible. Not resistance, but surgical removal." Strange finally turned to face the Space Marine. "You want me to teach it?" "I want you to share it," Thelonious corrected. "Not as a slave or a weapon, but as a colleague. The Librarius maintains facilities across the Imperium, training grounds where psychers learn discipline. If your techniques could be adapted, incorporated into our training regimens." The Space Marine's ice-chip eyes held something Strange had rarely seen in this universe. Hope. "We could save thousands, perhaps millions. Psychers who would otherwise face execution for lack of control could instead become defenders against the very threats that would claim them." "And in exchange?" Strange asked, because there was always an exchange in the 41st millennium. "Resources," Thelonious said. "Access to the Imperium's most complete archives on dimensional manipulation, warp theory, webway mechanics. Not just coordinates to the Black Library, but genuine support in researching your return. The blood ravens are knowledge seekers by nature. It is our greatest strength, and some would say our greatest weakness. Help us expand our understanding of psychic discipline, and we will help you find your way home. Strange studied the Space Marine's face, looking for deception, for manipulation. He found only earnest conviction. "What about the Inquisition?" Strange asked. "Vokos and Malvius aren't going to just let me operate independently." "The Inquisition wants results," Thelonious said. "You delivered Vathek alive and cleansed an entire forge world of Nurgle's corruption with minimal losses. That buys you consideration, not trust. Trust must be earned over years, perhaps decades, but operational latitude, enough to begin teaching without constant oversight." Strange turned back to the viewport, watching the warp flow past. In his universe, he'd been Earth's defender, operating from the Sanctum Sanctorum with Wong and a network of allies. Here, he was alone, stranded, fighting battles in a war that had no end. But Thelonious was offering him something he hadn't expected: purpose beyond survival. "I have conditions," Strange said finally. "Name them." "First, I'm not swearing any oaths to the Emperor. I'll help the Imperium because it's currently the best defense against chaos, but I'm not becoming a zealot. My loyalty is to protecting innocent lives, not to Imperial doctrine." Thelonious nodded slowly. "The Librarius understands the difference between faith and function. Acceptable. Second, I maintain autonomy. I'll teach, I'll consult, I'll even fight when necessary. But I'm not taking orders from Inquisitors who see me as a disposable asset. I work with people, not for them." "That will be difficult," Thelonious admitted. "The Imperium does not handle independent operators well, but the Blood Ravens have some latitude in our dealings with unorthodox allies. I can advocate for your autonomy, though it will require political maneuvering. Third, when I find a way home, if I find a way home, I'm taking it. No, you're too valuable to lose speeches, no attempts to stop me. I help you for as long as I'm trapped here. But the moment a door opens back to my universe, I'm walking through it." Thelonious extended his hand, massive in its ceramite gauntlet, but the gesture unmistakably human. "Agreed. On my honor as a codiceer of the Blood Ravens and a servant of the Emperor, I will support your autonomy and your eventual return home. In exchange, you will teach us what you can and fight beside us when chaos threatens." Strange took the Space Marine's hand. The grip was carefully controlled. Thelonious could have crushed every bone in Strange's hand without effort, but instead the handshake was almost gentle. "Then I suppose I'm staying," Strange said. "At least until I find my way back. Or until the galaxy breaks us both," Thelonious said with grim humor. "Welcome to the long war, sorcerer. It is a war that cannot be won, only survived one day at a time." The observation deck doors opened, and Inquisitor Vokos entered with Magos Zenith trailing behind. Her expression was unreadable, but Strange noticed she wasn't accompanied by armed guards. A small gesture of respect, perhaps. "Dr. Strange," she said formally, "Lord Inquisitor Malvius has reviewed your performance on Mazoa. The retrieval of Archmagos Vathek and the cleansing of demonic corruption has been noted as exceptional service to the Imperium. You are hereby granted provisional sanctioning as an Imperial Psyker Consultant, attached to the Blood Ravens chapter with operational autonomy in matters of warp theory and anti-demon operations." She produced a data slate and offered it to him. "These are your credentials. They will grant you access to most Imperial facilities and protection from summary execution by overzealous witch hunters. They will also mark you as a target for every chaos cult and demon in the sector. Use them wisely." Strange took the data slate, scanning the high Gothic text that his mystical abilities were slowly learning to parse. It was essentially a license to practice magic in a universe where magic was heresy, qualified, limited, but real. The coordinates to the webway gate on Tertius Prime have been transmitted to your personal data vault, Vokos continued. As promised. Though I advise against attempting entry without extensive preparation and Eldar cooperation, which you are unlikely to receive. Unless, Magos Zenith interjected, the sorcerer's unique dimensional knowledge proves valuable to Craftworld interests. Farseer probability, 16% chance of negotiated access given demonstrated anti-chaos capabilities. Vokos's augmetic eye whirred as it focused on Strange. You've earned a chance, sorcerer. Don't waste it. And don't make me regret advocating for your survival when half the Inquisitors in this sector wanted you executed as a precautionary measure. I'll try not to get corrupted by chaos and prove them right, Strange said dryly. The ghost of a smile touched Vokos's scarred face. See that you don't. The Emperor protects Doctor Strange, but he helps those who help themselves. She left, Zenith following with clicking mechadendrites. Strange and Thelonious remained in the observation deck, watching the warp flow past. What happens now? Strange asked. Now, Thelonious said, we return to the Omnis Arcanum, the Blood Raven's fortress monastery. You meet with the chief librarian, begin developing your training protocols, and start the long process of teaching our psychers techniques that may allow them to fight chaos without inevitably succumbing to it. And between those duties, the Space Marine gestured to the warp beyond the viewport. Between those duties, you research, you study, you experiment, and you search for the door that will take you home. It may take years, it may take decades. But if anyone in this galaxy has the discipline and knowledge to achieve the impossible, it is you. Strange smiled, a genuine smile, the first he'd felt since arriving in this nightmare universe. You know what the Ancient One told me when I first started training? She said that arrogance and fear kept me from learning the simplest and most significant lesson of all. Which was? Thelonious asked. It's not about me, Strange said quietly. He looked out at the warp, at the infinite expanse of chaos and darkness that threatened to consume everything. I became Sorcerer Supreme because I finally understood that protecting reality was more important than my ego, my desires, my comfort. I spent years guarding one planet. Now I'm in a galaxy where billions of worlds need defending, where the enemy isn't a single entity, but the fundamental nature of their own psychic existence. He turned to Thelonious. I'm terrified. I'm exhausted. I'm homesick in ways I can barely articulate. But I took an oath to protect reality from mystical threats, and this reality is drowning in them. So I guess I'm staying until I either find my way home or die trying to make a difference. Thelonious placed a hand on Strange's shoulder, a gesture of brotherhood that transcended species, chapter, or universe. Then you are already more loyal to the Imperium's true purpose than half its servants. Welcome to the Blood Ravens, Sorcerer Supreme. May your knowledge illuminate the darkness, and may the Emperor guide your path. Strange looked down at his hands, the same hands that had once performed surgery on the human brain with perfect precision, that had learned to manipulate reality itself through mystical gestures. In his universe, they had saved countless lives and defended Earth from dimensional threats. Here, in the 41st millennium, they would do the same, one surgical strike against chaos at a time. The litany of fury shuddered as it prepared to exit warp transit. Through the viewport, real space began to assert itself, stars appearing like diamonds against velvet darkness, a galaxy vast beyond comprehension, burning with a billion wars. And somewhere in that infinite expanse, a door home. Maybe. Until he found it, Dr. Stephen Strange would do what he'd always done. Fight the impossible, heal the wounded, and prove that even in the grim darkness of the far future, where there was only war, there could still be hope. The cloak settled around his shoulders with comfortable weight, and Strange allowed himself a moment of peace before the next battle. The next crisis. The next impossible choice. "The Emperor protects," he murmured, testing the words. "That he does," Thelonious agreed. "But today, so did you. And that is enough." The litany of fury dropped from the warp 3 weeks later, and Strange stood on the observation deck watching the Blood Raven's fortress monastery grow larger in the viewport. The Omnis Arcanum hung in orbit around a nameless ice world, a cathedral warship the size of a city, bristling with weapons and psychic wards. His new home, for now. The journey had given Strange time to process everything. The horror of Mazoa, the seductive whispers of chaos, the brutal pragmatism of the Imperium. He'd spent hours in meditation, rebuilding his mystical reserves and cataloging every difference between his universe's magic and this reality's warp-touched sorcery. The conclusions were troubling. His techniques could be taught, yes, but adapting them to the 41st millennium's hostile metaphysical environment would take years of research. The warp's corruption was insidious, seeping into every spell like an infection. Teaching Imperial Psychers his methods might give them an edge, or it might just create new vulnerabilities for Chaos to exploit. But he had to try, because the alternative was watching talented individuals executed for lack of control when they might have been saved with proper training. Thelonious joined him at the viewport. "Chief Librarian Isidore awaits your arrival. He is skeptical of your methods, but your performance on Mazoa has earned you the right to demonstrate them." "Skeptical is better than hostile," Strange said. He turned from the viewport, the cloak billowing behind him. "And honestly, I'm skeptical too. I'm one man with techniques designed for a completely different universe, trying to solve problems that have stumped the Imperium for 10,000 years. The odds of success are irrelevant," Thelonious interrupted. "The odds of the Emperor surviving 10,000 years on the Golden Throne were infinitesimal. The odds of humanity surviving against chaos, Xenos, and its own worst impulses are worse. We survive anyway, through faith, determination, and the willingness to attempt the impossible." Strange smiled despite himself. "You'd have gotten along with the Ancient One. She said something similar once. We never lose our demons, Stephen. We only learn to live above them." "Wise words," Thelonious said. "Perhaps your Ancient One and our Emperor understood the same fundamental truth, that the war against darkness is eternal. But every day we hold the line is a victory." The litany of fury docked with the fortress monastery with a shudder of maglocks engaging. Strange gathered his few possessions, the cloak, his focus crystals, the data slate containing coordinates to the webway gate on Tertius Prime. Everything else he'd lost in the dimensional crossing, including the time stone. The loss still ached. The Eye of Agamotto had been more than a tool. It had been a symbol of his responsibility as Sorcerer Supreme. Without it, he felt incomplete. But he'd learned long ago that a surgeon's skill wasn't in their tools, but in their hands and mind. The same applied to sorcery. They walked through corridors lined with books and data vaults, past training chambers where young psychers practiced channeling warp energy under the watchful eyes of librarian instructors. Strange felt the psychic weight of the place. Thousands of minds, all disciplined, all bound by faith and rigid training. He could feel their curiosity and fear as he passed. The stranger from beyond. The unsanctioned psyker who fought demons and survived. The variable that might save them or doom them all. Chief Librarian Isidore waited in a chamber that was part laboratory, part chapel. The ancient Space Marine's armor was deep crimson, his psychic hood crackling with barely contained power. His eyes, one organic, one augmetic, studied Strange with calculating intensity. "So," Isidore rumbled, his voice like grinding stone. "You are the sorcerer who claims to cut chaos away like a surgeon removing tumors. Codicil Thelonious speaks highly of you. Lord Inquisitor Malvius remains unconvinced." I find myself between positions. Strange met the chief librarian's gaze steadily. I don't claim miracles. I claim techniques developed over years of training in a universe with different metaphysical laws. Whether those techniques can be adapted here remains to be seen. But I'm willing to try if you're willing to learn. Isidore's expression shifted, not quite approval, but thoughtful consideration. Humility, unexpected from one who faced a lord of change and emerged uncorrupted. He gestured to a training circle inscribed with wards. Demonstrate. Show me this surgical precision you claim. Strange stepped into the circle, aware of dozens of librarians watching from observation galleries above. This was his audition. His chance to prove he was an asset, not a liability. He closed his eyes, centering himself. Without the Vishanti, without his familiar relics, with only the fundamentals of mystical discipline, the techniques the Ancient One had taught him before he'd become Sorcerer Supreme, before he'd relied on artifacts and higher powers. Just Stephen Strange, just a surgeon who'd learned to operate on reality itself. His hands moved through the gestures slowly, precisely. Golden light formed, corrupted immediately by veins of purple warp taint. But instead of fighting the corruption, Strange isolated it, cut it away from the core of his spell with the same precision he'd once used to remove brain tumors. The purple faded. The golden light stabilized. A murmur ran through the watching librarians. What should have been impossible, purifying a warp-touched spell after manifestation, had just been demonstrated. Again, Isidore commanded. With more complexity. Strange obliged. Spell after spell, each one touched by the warp's corruption, each one surgically cleansed through focused will and perfect understanding of where magic ended and corruption began. It was exhausting work, but he maintained the demonstrations for an hour before his reserves ran low. When he finally stopped, sweat pouring down his face, the chamber was silent. Isidore spoke first. I have trained psychers for 3 centuries. I have never seen such precise control, such clinical detachment from the warp's influence. The chief librarian approached Strange, his massive form towering over the sorcerer. You do not channel the warp as we do. You use it the way a surgeon uses a scalpel, as a tool, not an extension of your soul. That's the key difference, Strange said, breathing hard. In my universe, magic is external, a force you harness through discipline and knowledge. Here, psychic power is internal. It's part of you, connected to your emotions and soul. That's why chaos corrupts so easily. It uses your own nature against you. And your technique allows separation of self from power, Isidore said slowly. Creating distance between the psyker and the warp. It's not perfect, Strange cautioned, and it requires exceptional mental discipline. Not every psyker will be capable of learning it, but for those who can, he met Isidore's augmetic eye. For those who can, it might mean the difference between execution and service. Isidore turned to the watching librarians. We will study the sorcerer's methods, adapt what can be adapted, reject what cannot. The Blood Ravens have always pursued knowledge, even dangerous knowledge, when it might serve the Emperor's purpose. He looked back at Strange. You will instruct select librarians in your techniques, under strict observation and with multiple safeguards. If your methods prove viable, they will be shared with the librarius across the Imperium. If they prove flawed, he left the threat unspoken. Understood, Strange said. When do we begin? Tomorrow, Isidore said. Today, you rest. You have earned it. As Strange left the chamber with Thelonious, he felt something he hadn't experienced since arriving in this universe. Cautious optimism. Maybe, just maybe, he could make a difference here. Help people who desperately needed better tools to fight their inner demons, literal and metaphorical. And while he taught, He would search. Research dimensional theory, webway mechanics, anything that might lead him home. The journey would be long, perhaps impossible, but Dr. Stephen Strange had built his entire life on achieving the impossible through determination and skill. The 41st millennium was just another patient on the operating table, critically wounded, prognosis grim, but not dead yet. And as long as there was life, there was hope. Even in the grim darkness of the far future, where there was only war, one man from another universe would prove that hope itself was the most powerful magic of all. The cloak settled around his shoulders, and Strange smiled. He was home. Not the home he wanted, but a home nonetheless. For now, that would have to be enough.